Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Figures released today by the National Police Chiefs Council tell us that Donald Trump's visit to the United Kingdom, that 4-day trip back in July, cost nearly £18 million to police. It's a big number. Well, 10,000 officers were deployed from right across the country, and they performed over 26,000 shifts. And of course, there were marches, there were protests. Trump was in 4 separate locations. But wow, it is a huge sum of money. I mean, just compare this, for example. The recent royal wedding in Windsor. You know, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, a big day, a day the whole world looked at. And the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Thames Valley, Anthony Stansfield, said he reckons the cost of that was somewhere between £2 and £4 million. Tomorrow, Princess Eugenie gets married. The cost of that is estimated to be around about £2 million. What about major sporting events? Well, the Champions League final in Cardiff last June cost £5.7 million to police. So £18 million. When a big global royal wedding costs a maximum of £4 million to police, seems to be an astonishing sum of money, and particularly at a time when police resources are really being squeezed. Just yesterday we heard from the West Midlands Chief Constable Dave Thompson, who said, and he admitted honestly, that his officers are not responding as fast to emergencies and that fewer offenders are being brought to justice because of a 19% real terms reduction in police budgets. And Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has said, keeping Londoners safe is my first priority, but time and again, our funding is being cut. Now, to be fair, he does control 70% of the overall London budget, but the other 30%, he says, is being cut. So I want to know, given this eye-watering sum of money, are you happy that £18 million of your hard-earned tax money was spent on Donald Trump's security? If you think, no, this is a ludicrous sum of money, it should never have been allowed, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, you know what, like him or not, he's the president of the USA. We had to make sure that not only was he safe, but other people too, given the scale of the protest. If that's how you feel, please text to 84850. And I wonder, who do you think's really to blame for these high costs? Is it Trump and what he says? Is it the protesters? Or could it be people like Sadiq Khan, who frankly encourage these protests? Let me know what you think. Tweet. Use the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and Facebookers. Those of you watching us live, you can comment there too. £18 million. It's a lot of money. I wonder what Mia, who's a new caller from Blackheath, makes of that sum. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. So what happened there is a disgrace. It's a disgrace for taxpayer, and I think that is, something should be done about it. I don't pay my taxes for it to go to someone that a lot of us in London, especially, we do not appreciate, or we don't even want to have nothing to do with him. Like, his whole concept is American, he's doing his thing in America. Don't come to London and use our money because nobody likes you here. And I think that is outraging for us to be paying tax for someone like you.
I could put to you, Maya, that if we faced a terrible military threat or nuclear threat or some, terrible danger faced our country, it's Donald Trump and America who control the lion's share of NATO spending, who would be there to defend us. That's quite important, isn't it?
Well, he's not defending anyone. He's not even defending his own country. Something happened. Like earlier, I was listening to the BBC, and what happened is, like, we were talking about homeless people, and I know it's got nothing to do with the topic now, but we could have used that money for those people.
Well, Maya, of course, you can always argue with any form of government spending that you could spend the money elsewhere. But, are you saying that when he came to the UK, we shouldn't have spent that money and just take...
He shouldn't even come to the UK because he was not welcome in the first place.
So you think the president of the USA, the most powerful man in the world, somebody with whom, well, he is, whether you like it or not, he is, and somebody with whom we have the most important military alliance in the world, the country with whom we do the most business in the world, and
do business elsewhere.
Well, where else do you suggest then?
As in his own country, and he spends this money. He's there. You have the money. He's a businessman, allegedly, and he can do business, which he failed in numerous occasions. Do it in your country. Meet Theresa May or whoever you want to meet there, and then save us money to actually do something that's useful for our country.
Let's be clear. You don't think he should have come to the UK at all?
Yeah.
All right.
No.
All right, Mia, I don't... OK, fine, you've made your point of view. I don't agree with it at all, but you've made your point of view. He shouldn't have come at all, is what I'm getting. I wonder what Chris, another new caller from Buckhurst Hill, makes of this £18 million figure.
Nigel, firstly, it's a huge honour to speak to you. Thanks for having me on.
Not one bit.
Right, 18 million. The man on the street, if you compare that to, how many copies of the Daily Mirror and how many fire-ups is that going to get me? It's a lot of money, but in international relations... We have billions of trade. We need to do whatever we possibly can to show our friendship towards the President of the United States. 18 million, I mean, you may as well say 18 million, that's how much it costs to replace the light bulbs on the M1. It's just, it's silly to think it's a lot of money.
Or we could say, Chris, we could say the net 25 million quid a day we give the European Union. So you could put it in that context.
Don't get me started on that.
You could put it in that context. But Chris...
Honestly, 18 million, what is 18 million,
I get your point in terms of billions in terms of trade, and who knows going on from here. Maybe if and when Brexit happens, we get a big trade deal with America, who's to say? But Chris,
I'll tell you
why was the figure so big though, Chris? Chris, let me ask you a quick question. When that massive wedding... Prince Harry gets married to Meghan Markle, hundreds of millions around the world watch it. Windsor looks beautiful, the weather's great, it's a wonderful showcase for the UK, and it cost Thames Valley Police up to 4 million quid to police it. This costs... Do you know why this costs 18 million quid? Because of the sheer size and scale of the protests. Nearly 200,000 people in London.
No, don't get me started on our mayor. How can you encourage ridicule of the President of the United States? That man needs to go. Unfortunately, our Conservative candidate for 2020 is not fantastic, so I'm a little bit worried that Mayor Carney is going to get a bit of a...
Remind me of the name of the Conservative candidate, because I've forgotten.
What's he called?
Sean Bailey.
Like a good guy,
it's all right, don't worry. But it just shows you the problems the Conservatives have got. If you as a Tory can't remember the name of the candidate, I'm not knocking it. I'm not knocking you, because very few Tory voters would know his name at this moment in time. Chris, shouldn't we really... our previous caller said he shouldn't have come. This has all cost 18 million because of him.
The President of the United States not coming?
Well, that's what she's arguing. But isn't the reality of this? The reason the bill was so high is because so many figures, like Sadiq Khan, in the Labour Party, encouraged protests, and we as a country had to make sure, not just that the President was safe, but that the public was safe as well.
Correct. 100% correct, Nigel.
All right, great stuff.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling. Got to move on. Ian in Romney Marsh is my next caller. Good evening, Ian.
Hello, Nigel. Just one point, really. You made a point about if we were in trouble, Donald Trump and the US would be over to help us out.
Yes.
But Donald Trump says himself that when they do such things, these countries should pay for that defence. So, what
no, Ian, let me stop you. Please, let me stop you. NATO is a club of 28 members, all right? And some of them are massive countries like the USA, and some of them are tiddlers. All right. All Trump is asking for is that everybody obeys the rules of the club, which are very simple. It is that each member pays 2% of their GDP on defence. That's all he's asking for. And the problem, Ian, is this. Only 5 of the 28 members are paying their way. And so Trump says, look, we disproportionately, we know we're bigger, so we're happy to pay more money, but we disproportionately are here propping up this organisation that you expect help from when you're not prepared to pay your way. I think on that, Ian, he has a fair point, doesn't he?
I just think that he should be held to the same account that he holds everybody else, same standard. And if it's cost 18 million quid, when majority of the country don't really like Donald Trump, he should foot the bill for it. He's got plenty of money himself. Why don't he pay for it? You know?
So I mean, would you apply this principle to other foreign leaders? So Mr. Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan comes. Should we send him a bill?
Because I don't find other foreign leaders quite so distasteful, to be honest, and so sexist and so misogynist, so narcissist. So there are other foreign leaders that come here that probably shouldn't be here either, and equally the same should apply. But Donald Trump, he is not.
All right, so send him the bill, Ian, yeah?
Sorry?
Send him the bill, that's what you're saying.
Send him the bill,
All
absolutely.
right, no, OK, you made your point. Thank you very much indeed. Karen on Facebook says we should have spent much more on his visit. Mari says, if the Queen visits the USA, they will have to protect her, and it will cost a lot more. Colin says, protesters and Khan profess their hatred for a democratically elected president, but the Saudi Arabian king was fine. Hypocrites, including in particular John Bercow, who has held parliamentary receptions for all sorts of monstrous tyrants, and yet John Bercow saying he would not sanction the president being on the estate of Parliament. I'd have to say there's a lot of hypocrisy out there. It won't be so eye-watering if we do trade deals with him. I get by text. Nigel, I think that Princess Eugenie should pay the police out of their own pockets instead of a taxpayer, says Mark from Sunderland. Where would that end, Mark? I mean, would you charge Chelsea Football Club if they're in the cup final for the police? I mean, where would that end? Also, 18 million. Come on, most of those police are employed anyway, all right? I grant you there would have been lots of overtime. I'm actually sceptical that it really did cost 18 million because a lot of those police officers would have been paid anyway. Let's go quickly to Grace in Ealing. Grace, what do you make of that sum of money?
Like you said, it's police salary, so they probably would have been paid that anyway, but then
Yes.
you could argue that they should have been doing duty in other places in the country where police officers are needed. It was, as you say, really the fault of the protesters, although I do agree with the protesters about some of their concerns. I think that some of the things that Donald Trump stands for are deeply concerning, but protests like the one that happened do not help that cause. They only make Trump fans more angry with people on the left.
Oh, absolutely. Mind you, Grace, we could say one thing. Nice to see some police on the streets, wasn't it?
Indeed, yes, and I think it's really important that we value our police officers. But I, as someone who am generally left-leaning on most issues, but not all, was frustrated seeing people who I would agree with about lots of things protesting angrily because all that I could see on social media was people on the right saying, look at those idiots on the left, aren't they?
Well, do you know what,
nutters?"
Grace? I'm about to show you just how deranged some of the comments and protests on President Trump have been. Thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Tom. It cost £18 million to finance the policing of Trump's visit because there is so much hatred being poured out against him. Now, whether you agree with him or not, frankly, we've got to a point, and Grace, my caller before the break, said, as somebody on the left, she's pretty much embarrassed by what some on her side say. Very interesting article in today's Times newspaper by Gerard Baker. He says, last weekend, as Brett Kavanaugh, the president's Supreme Court nominee, was finally being confirmed in the Senate, a senior executive at Google, a fella called Dave Hogue, tweeted, "You are finished, Republican Party. You polished the final nail of your own coffins. F you. All go to hell." He followed it up by saying, "I hope the last images burned into your slimy, evil, treasonous retinas are millions of women laughing and clapping and celebrating as your souls descend into the flames," which is extraordinary given that Google's founding motto is "Don't be evil." I mean, here's somebody running one of the most important sites in the world where we're supposed to go and be able through Google search to get neutral information. So I'm worried on that score, but it shows you the extremism of the language. Oh, we'll try this then. Let's go for American academia, shall we? I mean, Georgetown University is one of the most reputable and oldest universities in America. And yet, Associate Professor Christine Fair, at about the same time as Kavanaugh was being nominated, delivered her verdict, she said all of them, meaning white male Republicans, deserve miserable deaths, while feminists laugh as they take their last gasps. I mean, this is just deranged behaviour. And I just wonder whether, actually, the sheer extremism of this language, yes, sure, it drives protesters onto the streets, but I wonder whether actually, when those midterms come on the 6th of November, they might not actually help the president. And we're also seeing some of that derangement here. I mean, Alistair Campbell, who, you know, has been here with me in this studio and on this show, I mean, as Brexit date approaches, he is now putting out tweets, sort of hoping Boris Johnson falls under a bus. It's not quite the same level that we're getting in America, but somehow the so-called liberal left, who see themselves as being the nice, fluffy, cuddly types, are looking pretty extreme to me. So there's no doubt in my mind, the reason it cost all this money is because of the Sadiqs and everybody else. Now, I've got a policeman here who's not happy. He says, just because we are paid salaries does not mean we should not get a day off. A lot of officers are working 7 days plus before and after Trump left. Our overtime never gets paid. Well, that's wrong, and we're encouraged to take it as time back, but we never get it. So a policeman here saying, look, you know, it wasn't us taking you for a ride, and I absolutely believe you. Charlie is calling from Dorking, and there's a new caller to this show. Was he worth 18 million quid, Charlie?
Nigel, first and foremost, America are our closest allies. They're our cousins.
Yep.
If it wasn't for the Americans, we'd all be blonde hair, blue eyes, speaking German. Okay, let's.
I think there is no doubt that is true.
Okay, right. Trump. I'm not a lover of Trump. I think he's a bit of a showman, but
a bit.
He is the elected president. He is commander-in-chief, elected president of the United States, who the American people have elected. Shouldn't we show him a little bit of respect? Let me ask you a question.
Go on.
If it was Hillary Clinton coming over, would that have got leaked? It cost 18 million quid?
Now, Charlie,
let me ask you that.
Charlie, no. I'm pleased you have, because Obama came, of course, in 2016.
Yeah.
At David Cameron's request to tell us not to vote for Brexit, or we'd be at the back of the queue, and that cost £1.6 million to police. The reason this cost £18 million
is because you've got all the
everyone's whipping up hatred, whipping up protests, and the police. And the police are worried that if you've got people using very extreme language against Trump, they're worried what the consequences could be.
Yeah.
So I would say, Charlie, don't blame this bill on Trump. Blame it on those in this country who have whipped up a narrative of outright hatred.
That was just the point I was making. And also, can I just say, I'm not a lover of Trump.
No, you said that.
I don't sort of dislike him, but can you imagine what it'd be like if Hillary Clinton was encouraged? Blimey, look, listen.
Do you know what? If Hillary Clinton had been president, I wouldn't have. I mean, much as I dislike her, we wouldn't have urged people. Those of us on the other side of the spectrum would not have urged protests and effigies. It wouldn't have happened. Charlie, I'm going to move on to Mohammed, who's calling from Stepney Green. Good evening, Mohammed.
Oh, good evening.
Welcome back. Now, 18 million quid, Mohammed. A lot of money.
You know what? In my eyes, it's a complete waste of money. If he's got his own security, why do they deal with all the issues and everything else?
Because his own security aren't big enough to deal with 200,000 chanting protesters who are marching, down Regent Street and through central London. And albeit, he may not have been in immediate danger from them, but overall, because of the protest, the bill was huge.
If the British public don't like him, why let him come into the country then?
Well, how do you know? How do you know the British? I mean, I've got here, chap says to me here on text, if it wasn't for the protesting left, he wouldn't have needed so much security. As a true old Londoner, I welcome Trump. I mean, plenty of people, Mohammed, welcomed him coming.
And plenty of people did, and that's why you had to have the police forces come into action. You had protests and everything else.
But why is it, Mohammed, when we get people, Middle Eastern leaders, where, people's hands get chopped off and there are public executions, where are the protests then on the grounds of human rights?
The grounds of...
Well, it's a fair point, isn't it? He's gone. He's gone. I've lost him. Evening, Nigel. Your first caller has exemplified accidentally what is the silent majority's view. You go and protest and cost us, the taxpayer, millions, and then complain about it. Hypocrisy! I get in capital letters and 4 exclamation marks. That's a record, I think, Pete, in Wantage. Let's go to Chris in Isleworth. Chris, good evening to you.
Good evening, Nigel. Firstly, let me say I'm totally disgusted with the comments you made about the guy who sort of said, we'd be blue-eyed and blonde-eyed if the Americans didn't come into the war until the end. And don't forget, Oscar, I'm Anglo-Indian. We fought with the Commonwealth brothers, with you British, to save. So it wasn't America. We were fighting
Chris.
Wait.
Chris, do you honestly think, Chris?
We were fighting from the beginning. The Americans came in at the end.
They did.
Thankfully for all that. But
Chris, there were huge numbers of Indian servicemen in both wars. And they were all volunteers, by the way. Nobody was pressed from the Empire to come and fight. They were all volunteers. And they made up 40% of our total effort on land, sea and air in both world wars. I absolutely understand, acknowledge.
Thank you very much.
Going back. But Chris, I must just say this quickly. We couldn't have launched D-Day without the Americans. We could not have liberated.
And our Commonwealth brothers? No, don't.
We couldn't have done it. We could. All right, Chris. I tell you what. I'm not going to argue World War II with you. Let's go back to Trump and the 18 million quid.
Let's go back to that. All right. He was attacking Sadiq Khan about not doing much about terrorism. What's he doing about gun crime? Why is he talking about our policies over here? Let him sort out his own problems in his own back door. That's why a lot of people didn't want him to come here.
Okay.
And he came here too quickly. Maybe maybe a second term, or after 4 years, not so quickly.
Well, I would have thought he should have come a lot more quickly. But Chris,
really?
But Chris, tell me,
where's your patriotism, Nigel? Where's your patriotism?
I think that it's quite patriotic to actually want to welcome the one person who may just defend us against disaster. Because he's got the military muscle to do it, and B, he loves this country. His mum was a Scot. His mum was a Scot. He holds that very, very dearly. He's got investments in Scotland, and he's not somebody with big global investments. Scotland and Ireland being just about his only overseas investments. Chris, are you telling me he simply shouldn't have come on this visit?
Not so quickly.
OK, fine. All right, different point of view. Thank you, Chris. Going to go off to Edna, who's a new caller from Upminster. Good evening, Edna.
Hello, Nigel. Very nice to speak to you.
Well, welcome. So what do you make of it all? 18 million.
18 million is a lot of money. But the Conservatives are in power, aren't they?
I'm not. Do you know what? Some mornings... I'm not sure, Edna.
Well, we're hoping they are.
Yeah, OK, yeah.
Why didn't they arrange some sort of deal that we could have struck with him coming over? He's not over here very often.
No.
So... we're knocking the Labour Party about what they're saying about him and causing problems. But what have the Conservatives really done in this respect?
Well, do you know what, Edna? Yeah. I was in Trump Tower 3 days after he won the election, talking to some of his campaign managers and advisors, and they were really excited. Hey, you've got Brexit, we've got this president, we can do a trade deal really quickly. And the reason we can't is because it took 9 months to trigger Article 50, 2-year process for Article 50, and now a transition period that could last for years. That's why we couldn't... So we're not taking advantage, Edna, in many ways, of what could be done with the Americans and elsewhere. Edna, thank you for your call. I love that comment. The Conservatives are in power, aren't they? Depends which morning you wake up, I suppose. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:30 and time for the news with Thomas Watts.
Cannabis.
Was it worth £18 million to police Donald Trump's visit? I think it was, and it wouldn't have been anything like that, Bill, had it not been for people being encouraged to go out and protest, and many of them using really very extreme language. Talking of controversial leaders, Tony Blair. Oh, yes, he never goes away now, does he? He keeps on popping up. Big speech at Reuters today. He talked about the perennial virus of left-wing politics taking over the Labour Party and a betrayal of the values for which he stood as leader. And he also says, I still believe it's possible that Brexit is stopped. He says there's a 50% chance there'll be another referendum. Thank you, Mr. Blair. We keep hearing from you on a regular basis. And John Major, he's popped up. Now, he was asked about his famous comment back at the time of the Maastricht difficulty when he used the word, not a great word, folks, I'll say it only once and quickly, he called them bastards, didn't he? And they were really giving him a hard time. He's asked about this lot, who are now really giving Mrs May a difficult time. Of course, he means Boris and Jacob Rees-Mogg and David Davis and that lot. And he went back to the past and said their behaviour was pretty intolerable, but not nearly as intolerable as the way the present Prime Minister is being treated. So there I was at Lord's a couple of years ago, having a cup of tea, it was tea time, and John Major was standing next to me, and hello, and we started to chat. And I talked about that, him using that word and the controversy it caused. He said, well, of course, Nigel, if you'd been there, I wouldn't have had so much trouble with you. I said, but sorry, John, I'm far more Eurosceptic than Peter Lilly or Michael Howard or all those people that you were talking about then. Oh, yes, he said, the difference is they were stabbing me in the back. You'd have just come and stabbed me in the front. And he's absolutely right. So I thought I'd have to say on a personal level, he's one former Prime Minister who generally seems quite at ease with himself and with life, although Brexit is driving him into a pretty deranged position. Everyone's going mad. The establishment hate Trump and behave in a deranged way, and many of them are here over Brexit. Back to the 18 million quid, and was it worth it? Well, lots and lots of opinions here. I'm no Trump fan. The irony is, the people who protested are the same people saying it cost the police too much. You can't win, says Ross in Dundee. Nigel, where's this hate come from? It started from Trump himself. He has bred hatred and divisiveness, and everything he does and says Debbie from Qatar. Well, Debbie, you may think that, but I have to say, I've never seen the kind of language, such as I read out 15 minutes ago, coming from university assistant professors and senior executives at Google. Let's go to Bury St Edmunds, speak to Cameron, a new caller to this show. Cameron, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure to talk to you. So was it worth 18 million quid, Cameron?
I think it was. I also think it's being taken slightly out of context by sort of the people that want to paint this out to sort of be a bit of a scandal, because this visit was 4 days versus a royal wedding of 1 day. And actually it was £4.5 million a day versus, if you break that 18 million down over 4, versus the cost that we're paying daily to remain in the EU, the daily cost to police the Notting Hill Carnival. I feel like if we really want to talk of misuse of assets of the police, there are things that we sort of spent that budget on far more inappropriate than a visit with one of the most influential people in the world.
And of course there were 4 different visits and locations, weren't there?
Exactly. I just feel that it's been spun completely out of context when actually we are, no matter what people want to happen in March, we are leaving the EU. We do need powerful allies around us, and actually Donald Trump could well be one of the greatest allies we need.
Cameron, I think you've put the spending into very, very good context. It was 4 days, not 1 day. Actually, in the broad scheme of things, I'm not saying it won't matter, but you're right, we need them as a friend. Cameron, thank you for that. Very concise, very easy. Stephen, another new caller from Canterbury in Kent. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, was it worth it?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that we're not just welcoming President Trump to our country, we're welcoming America, our closest ally.
Yes.
And I agree that the hatred whipped up by the London Mayor and others is partly responsible for the escalating costs. Mm-hmm. But if you take, I don't know the figures, and I haven't got a breakdown of this £18 million, but these police, if a lot of this is police overtime, the police are being paid anyway.
Yes.
If you're paying each officer just for 4 days an extra, let's say £2,000, which I can't believe it's that much, but let's say it's £2,000. And if you have 2,000 extra, 2,000 officers being paid overtime, that's £4 million.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, the truth of this is that most of this so-called 18 million is what the police would have been paid anyway. We did get that comment from a police officer saying they don't pay us the overtime, they try and sneak it back from us. But the reality, Stephen, is most of that so-called bill, we pay them anyway. Maybe the police themselves will get a little bit less time off and resent that. But you're right, it didn't really cost 18 million quid, did it?
No, absolutely right. And someone should give a breakdown and be responsible for producing this figure.
Yeah, well, we haven't got that.
The other thing I should say is what we should do is invite Donald Trump back again.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Stephen. Thank you for your call. And callers there putting this all in some sense of perspective. Better value than Eugenie's wedding tomorrow, I get from Lisa. It was it's her wedding day on Friday. Is it tomorrow or Saturday, isn't it? Right, yes, Nigel, I'm extremely happy about it. Trump... actually is somebody to be admired. Well, there we are. You see, we get whenever we discuss Donald Trump, we get all these points of view. Worth every centre. Can't increase the cost with his constant drivel. What does Robin Wimbledon make of it all? Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, thank you. I have to say, when you do think about it, and it's spaced out over 4 days, and it's 4 different locations, and given the level of threat that clearly the police thought was there, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, you just got to, if that's what it costs, that's what it costs. He's the president of one of our biggest allies, and he's more than entitled to come over, give a state visit, but likewise people are more than entitled to protest. And so if that's how much it costs to kind of keep everyone safe and keep the show on the road, then I'm fine with that. I guess they wanted to pick you up, Nigel, on a comment you made earlier to someone else who called in, who was saying that it was like, how dare Trump come and criticise Sadiq Khan, and you said, no, that's completely fine. Donald Trump's the president of the USA, and he has every right to criticise our politicians as a close ally, etc., which I agree with, and you agreed with that. But then I seem to remember just before the referendum when Obama came over and said, if we leave the EU, we'll go to the back of the queue. You weren't so okay with that. Hang on. Those two opinions.
Hang on. Of course, British Prime Ministers comment on American presidents and vice versa. But you know what they don't do? They don't comment on them during the short election campaign. They're very scrupulous not to do so. And the point about Obama, this was a direct intervention in our referendum campaign. A very different thing, Rob, I would suggest.
Well, I mean, interesting to see that, because imagine when it comes to the next London mayoral election, if Donald Trump is still president, I'm sure he won't keep quiet on his thoughts on Sadiq Khan mid-election. I've got no doubt about that.
Well, I would like to say that he will keep quiet, but he is Donald Trump and he doesn't keep to many rules. I agree with you. Look, Rob, I support Trump because I think the general direction of travel that he wants to pursue is right. If you look at the United Nations speech that he gave a few years ago, that is the Trump, that is what his philosophy is. And you can agree with it or disagree with it, but it's there. And I think on the big stuff, I think actually he's right in many, many things. That's not to say, as a supporter, that I agree with absolutely every single statement that comes out on Twitter. All right, Rob, I thank you very much indeed for your... Here we are. Donald Trump is a loathsome individual. The government ought to send that clown a bill. Why did the police... Why do we need the police? He could have brought his own. I mean, how many would he have needed, Graham? It's not rational, some of this stuff. Let those that invited him pay the bill. Jim, they did. You. Because he was invited on behalf of us, the British people, by our government. And he says 18 million less into the UK. Well, but it's less than 1 day's contribution to the European Union. And it's about the same as what we spend on foreign aid every single day. Just to give you a sense of perspective. If some of the left had not been so hysterical, the bill would have been half. So strong opinions on both sides of this, as I rather expected. John is calling from Portsmouth. Hi, John.
Hello, Nigel.
So very strong views here, John. We're hearing on both sides of this, from send him the bill, don't ever let him come back, he shouldn't have come in the first place, to others thinking, you know what, they're a very, very important ally. And it wasn't just Donald Trump coming, it was the representative of the USA. Where do you sit on this?
Well, at the end of the day, he should be here. I mean, or rather, he should come over for the simple reason, you know, we make a fortune now of trading with America, as others have said.
Yep.
You know, people are saying, oh, yeah, no, but nobody likes him. Actually, there's a lot of people in this country that do. I think he's done a wonderful job in terms of, I mean, how many models say, oh, I'm looking for world peace? He's actually working on that. I mean, he got a peace agreement with Korea.
Well, he's certainly got them round the table, and there's progress being made. And this idea that he's a warmonger, it's all the other American presidents and British prime ministers that constantly go to war. He's the one saying we should be more careful.
Yeah. Not only that, he's also organised free trade deals with several countries, not just the EU. So he's done pretty well on that. Maybe our government should take some notes.
Well, do you know what, John? I rather agree with you. Thank you very much indeed. Tell you what, folks, love him or hate him, the one remarkable thing that he has done is keep his promises. Things that he said he'd do, and he's done them. I wonder whether Mrs May will be keeping her promises at the European Summit this time next week, Thursday evening, and I'll be there in Brussels. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Thomas Watts. It only cost £18 million to police the Trump 4-day visit to the UK because of all the protesters. They're the ones, perhaps, that should pay the bill, not Donald Trump. Chris on Facebook says it's only money. May gave the DUP 50-odd times that for just a couple of votes in Parliament. Well, that's true. And as I say, we spend that on foreign aid every day and more on our EU membership, things that perhaps would get some people very hot under the collar, maybe not others. Very happy with Trump's visit. Worth every penny, says Mick on Twitter. Oliver is a new caller from Fulham. Good evening, Oliver.
Good evening, Mr. Farage.
Yeah, welcome. So, what do you make of this bill?
I think it's, in the grand scheme of things, minuscule, and I think it's a good headline. So for people, as you say, there is a cost so much from the protest, which people are perfectly allowed to do. But sitting here really saying it's a huge expense when, in the grand scheme of things, it's not really. And I don't actually think you can put a price on something if you have good relations with someone post-Brexit, such as the USA.
Absolutely. Oliver, I'd like to spend longer with you. Your phone line is dreadful. Thank you. You're a first-time caller. Come back to us at some point in the future. Nigel, if we had enough police, there would have been no need to pay for overtime, says Fran in South London. All I can say is just nice to see police on the streets again. Hadn't seen that for years. Jason is a new caller from Milton Keynes in Bucks. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Nigel. Great to talk to you. Agree with everything you said tonight. Brilliant. Just like to say, have they thought about when we don't get our Brexit that we've all voted for, what the police budget would be for when we all march onto Downing Street, 17.4 million of us?
My job, of course, Jason, has always been to encourage people to vote, and right now to lobby their MPs to, make sure Brexit gets delivered. But do you? And we're talking about a non-violent march, of course. Do you? Slightly tangential, but do you genuinely, Jason, think? Now, I know there'll be electoral anger if it's not delivered, but do you really think that people would in this country take to the streets and march on Downing Street?
Well, I don't think it'd probably be 17.4, but I think it'd be quite a few million, because most of us out here, or a lot of us, or everyone I speak to, are just sick of it. We just want the Brexit we voted for, and democracy would definitely be finished.
Jason, very, very powerful points. And I tell you what, next Friday morning, when we understand what the shape of this deal is, and we may well get a very big feeling next week, Jason, it'll be people like you that I'll be wanting to talk to work out what the reaction is going to be if she's seen to sell out Brexit. Johnny is calling from Shooters Hill. Evening, Johnny.
Hello, Nigel.
So,
I think it's disgusting we didn't actually have a state visit for Donald Trump.
Yeah, people have lost this. It wasn't a full. I mean, he did get to meet the Queen, but it was a working visit, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and a lot of this £18 million was kind of obviously to contain the protesters. I'm disgusted that actual protest was allowed to happen. If it had been a right-wing protest, majority of them aren't even allowed to go ahead. And another thing that really annoys me is these people. They're generally state scroungers. How did they suddenly get the day off work? I'll tell you how, because they weren't at work in the first place. It just...
Johnny, what a thing to say,
Come
honestly.
on, Nigel, you know it, Nigel. These are people, usual suspects, Swampy and Swampette, out there on the anti-capitalism marches. But, it's...
Actually, Johnny, I a slightly different perspective, and I do get what you're saying. I noticed on the march that an awful lot of people on the march seem frightfully well-to-do, a lot of them called Sebastian or Jocasta, and it struck me there were a lot of them there with very rich mummies and daddies who probably equally don't have an awful lot to do in life, because life's just too comfortable.
That's because at university, Nigel, they get poisoned by the left wing, they get infiltrated, and they kind of... their minds get messed around with.
We have to keep a sense of balance on this show, Johnny, but I'm also deeply worried about much of what is being taught at university. So, Johnny, it should have been a full-on state visit, and the hell with the cost of policing it, yeah?
Absolutely. This is one of the most successful presidents in the United States of America. He's going to be a two-term president, and there's parts of America that have been absolutely bloated by unemployment. They've people in depression, and he's actually put a life back into many, many parts of America. And the thing is, you get a very distorted view over here. People think, that the people in America, a lot of people hate him. It's just so distorted. The media really does distort
Johnny, he was elected on a ticket. Immigration into America is lower at the moment than it's been since before Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. and unemployment is lower than it was since Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. He promised he'd do those things. He's doing it. Johnny, great call. Thank you very much indeed. I imagine when our PM visits Washington, the American taxpayer will foot the bill. What's the fuss all about, says Douglas. Well, Douglas, I have to say, when she's in America, very few people will protest her. In fact, truth is, very few in America even know who she is, I would have thought. Tony is calling from Epsom. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well. So strong opinions on both sides of this. Where do you stand?
Well, I just want to mirror the previous caller. I just want to hear to what he just said.
Yes.
I just want to add to that. When Obama came over a couple of years back and he colluded with the Remainers. I mean,
he certainly did.
Then Democrats can't help themselves when it comes to collusion. But I think that we missed a trick when Trump came over because apparently we've got a Brexit government. Apparently,
that's what they tell us, Tony.
Yeah, and Donald Trump's a very nation-state kind of leader, which is what we're edging towards, or ploughing towards.
Yes.
And I'm gutted we didn't have a Donald Trump rally. I reckon he would have filled Wembley Stadium. We should have had a couple of them.
Tony,
I think we missed a trick there.
Tony, can I say that I did suggest to the Trump team that they should hold a big football star rally, and you know what, Tony? They would have filled it. Of that, I've got no doubt at all. Tony, thanks for your call. I'm going to take Bradley, who's a new caller from Gillingham in Kent. Hi, Bradley.
Hi, Nigel. I'm from Gillingham in Dorset.
In Dorset? Well, there we are. Well, somebody, after this show is over, I'm going to go and shout at somebody in the control room. Right, Gillingham in Dorset, OK, which is very different to Gillingham in Kent. Anyway, Bradley, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. I mean, I listen to what goes on. I'm not really into politics. I don't know a lot about it. But all I know that Donald Trump, I reckon personally, he's a really, really nice guy. He does a great deal for America. He does a lot for America. And I think if he'd run this country, he'd put the great back into Britain. And the thing is, they're moaning about £18 million for security. Yeah. So what? Even if it costs $30 million. I mean, May's just given $40 million to Africa, hasn't she?
Mrs. May today will give £25 million to the European Union. And because she next week wants to sign up to a deal we didn't vote for, she's prepared to give them $39 billion. What are we worrying about 18 million quid for? Bradley, I'll tell you what, mate, if he was in charge of our negotiations, not her, we'd be in a far better place, wouldn't we?
We would, and he said to the EU, and that's what we should have done.
Well, and of course he was a believer in Brexit. He is a believer in the nation state. And why do you think, Bradley, I mean, you've looked at this, you think he's a great guy. Why do you think there's so much hatred being poured out towards him?
Why do I think that?
Yeah, why are there so many people, literally losing control when they talk about Trump? What is it that really gets them? Is it his personality? Is it the sort of bragging? I mean, what is it?
I think it's because a lot of them are worried that the fact that they're worried that if he got into power, or if he was over here, or if our government took his side, was do what he was to do, half of them would get sent back.
Right, do you think that's what it is? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
definitely. It's no different than said it can be voted for mayor, isn't it?
Well, what it is, Bradley, if you even talk about immigration, you just get the left just try and shout you down and try and close down debate. And occasionally, just occasionally, Trump does say things that are a bit over the top, and I, as a supporter, accept that. But, Bradley, you're not on your own being a Trump fan. Thank you for your call. Peter says on Twitter, I don't care how much it costs. Pay it. Did the Donald enjoy his visit? ? I hope so. Worth every penny, says Zoe from Walthamstow. The mainstream media calls this problem with Trump. Let them pick up the bill for 18 million quid. Well, certainly. That's something he'd agree with because he calls them fake news and he refuses to take questions from CNN. And that's the way he does stuff. And there's never been anyone quite like it before. And he does really rile up some people. But have to say, some of the sheer hatred that is coming out post the Kavanagh confirmation says to me the left have lost the plot completely, and it's all to his advantage. I'm going to be back here on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock tonight. It's Tom Swarbrick, but up next it's Ian Dale.
We could have a long discussion